Good afternoon. My name is Dan Dyer, and I'm here today to talk about how to turn any instrument into an electronic instrument. This is something I got into right at the beginning of the lockdown because I live in a townhome with neighbors locked down on either side of me, and I'm also a percussionist. So put two and two together, I had to come up with something. This worked really well for percussion because when you turn a percussion instrument electronic, the instrument itself doesn't need to make a sound. All it needs to do is to be able to send sound to a separate device and through a lot of complicated electronics produce a sound that only a computer can hear. However, that's not what we're covering today. What we're going to do today is we're going to take any acoustic instrument and turn it electronic. I'm hoping to inspire a little bit of creativity, or a lot of creativity, and hopefully some people can come up with some new ideas based on what I've presented here this afternoon. In any case, I had a lot of fun doing this, and I hope you all have a lot of fun trying this out on your own. First thing we're going to talk about today is all of the supplies we're going to need for this project. First thing, obviously, is a soldering iron. Next, we're going to need a wire cutter and a wire stripper. I actually have a multi-tool which does both of these. Comes in very handy. The next is our shrink tubing. I happen to like the kind of shrink tubing that has super glue inside, so when you heat it and it shrinks, it squeezes the glue out and it holds everything together very nicely. Also great if you repair your own headphones. Next thing we need, right to the left of those, is a spool of lead soldering flux or lead solder. You could get this at pretty much any hobby store. It's cheap, it's awesome, and it sticks metal things together. And last but not least, we need a heat gun. If you do not have a heat gun, a nice hair dryer will work. It will just take a little bit longer. Want to make sure you keep your fingers away from the project because as it takes longer, things around it will get hotter. The first part we're going to need for this simple project is a small buzzer. You can get these at pretty much any hobby store. Plan on spending about $3 to $5. Second thing we're going to need is a mono cable. So here is the end of a mono cable. If you notice, it only has two metal parts separated by one rubber insulator, and that is because at the other end of it we have two wires. So here's the part we've all been waiting for. So we're going to start with the buzzer and we're going to separate the wires and we're going to twist them together, make sure we have no stray copper going anywhere. That will cause things to be very difficult and awkward later on. And you want to make sure that at this point that you've plugged your soldering iron in and that it's nice and hot. Alright, and you want to obviously have your lead solder ready too. Just to illustrate something about soldering, you really don't want to just put the solder on the part and expect them to stick together. That's called painting, and it really won't provide a strong connection. It will slip off. It's not an if, it's a when. It will slip off later on, and if that's how you did all your connections, you're going to have no idea which connection it is that broke. So here we are. We're doing what's called tinning the wires. We're just going to get enough of that on there so when we put everything together later, it's going to help the iron heat up the actual copper by having more of the tin on there in the first place. And we're going to do the same thing to the end of the mono cable here. Get just enough solder on there. There I am, trying not to burn my fingers. Just enough solder on there that we can get the heat from the soldering iron or soldering gun if you're using one of those to go all the way through the wire. That's going to help the lead soldering heat up later on. And there's the smoke. That wire just didn't want to behave itself. It's alright, you want to make sure you get things absolutely right in this step because it will make things look better later on. Alright, there I am with 2 of my shrink wrap cable insulators. I love this shrink tubing. I don't remember what the particular brand is, and I really can't talk about that here anyway, but this is the one where once it is heated, it actually squeezes the glue out over everything, and not only does that protect it from the weather, it also does a really good job of preventing the wires from pulling apart. So if this is your first time soldering, this is a very nice safeguard to have to make sure it doesn't come apart in the middle of a project later on. Alright, we're getting some shrink tubing on the mono end there. Get that on there, and if you notice, I'm pushing those all the way down. That's obviously not where it's going to go, but since it's designed to react to a heat source and shrink, you don't want it near the soldering iron or it will stick in the wrong place. Alright, there we are. If you notice, if you could see, the red cable is going to the red cable on the piezo buzzer, or piezo buzzer, potato, it's getting connected to the wire that's in the center of the mono. There I am. If you notice, I'm heating it on one side and the lead's on the other. And what that does is that forces the copper wire to get hot and heat up the solder. That's the way you want to do it. If you just stick the solder on there, you're basically just painting and it's going to come off. Alright, looks like we're good to go there. Alright, nice and sturdy. So here we are, sliding the shrink tubing. I've now slid the red and black shrink tubing. It's nice and color coded. The red shrink tubing is over the red center positive cable, and the black shrink tubing is on the black outer and black negative cable, and I've slid the big cable on top of the little cables, and that's going to help this thing look very neat in the end, and it's also going to make it sturdy. What you'll notice a lot of times with electronics is that the neater and tidier it looks, the sturdier it is. So if you get done with something and it doesn't look quite the way you were hoping, do it again, because it's going to come apart later on. So there we are with that heat gun, getting it nice and hot. You can see the shrink tubing doing what it does, shrinking. And you want to keep after this until you actually notice the shape of the wires inside the tube starting to be visible outside the tube. That's how you know that is clinging to every inch of that. And sometimes if you look really close at the ends, you could see a little bit of that clear glue starting to creep out, and that's how you know it's where it should be. So hopefully this works, because if it doesn't, that is really tough to get apart, because that is some impressively awesome glue they put in these things. So there we are. There is our piezo or piezo buzzer. For those of you who insist on having things look absolutely uniform, we can get any kind of plastic dipping product. Can't discuss brands here. Spray that over these. Don't just use paint. Some paint can be conductive when it's wet, and that's going to cause some problems. Use this stuff. You're basically spraying rubber or plastic on it, depending on which product you use. They both work fine over this whole thing. So now we have one color of plastic, and it actually, in this case, happens to match the cable. So here we are, testing it out on a nice acoustic guitar. And what's this? We can do this with a recorder as well. Well, I guess anything's a musical instrument now. While it's not the focus of this video would be incomplete if I did not talk about the fact that you can use these little buzzers as a trigger in an electronic drum set, provided that you have a drum module to communicate between the drum set and whatever you're recording it with. The way you turn one of these little buzzers into a trigger is you sandwich it between a piece of very light, very stiff foam and very light, very flexible foam. And you want to sandwich it in between these two pieces of foam with mounting tape. The really wonderful side effect of miking or triggering your instrument in this way is that it completely isolates the sound of the instrument. You don't really hear the washing machine, the neighbor's dog, the neighbor's kids, traffic going by outside, because it will not pick up any of those sounds. The only thing that the buzzer will pick up is the sound of the instrument or the pressure wave if using it as a trigger. The pressure wave of your stick hitting the trigger and the trigger communicating with the drum module. I want to thank everyone for sticking around for the end of this presentation. I tried to keep it short, and I think we succeeded. I hope this has boosted morale, and I really hope that this gives new insight into maybe some ideas into recording from home and having as much fun as possible doing what we love to do.